You think you know someone's worth the moment you see them. You take one look at the uniform, the name tag, the tired eyes behind the security desk, and your brain files them away under not important. Most people do it without even noticing. They walk past a guard the same way they walk past a trash can, aware it exists, grateful someone else deals with it, never once wondering what's inside. Marcus Webb was not most people. He was worse. He was the kind of man who noticed the guard, made direct eye contact, and then chose deliberately and with full awareness to make that person feel small. He had a gift for it, actually, the precise calibration of contempt, the smile that wasn't quite a smile, the tone of voice that asked a normal question in a way that somehow still managed to humiliate the person answering it. His colleagues at Ridiculed Capital called it his way. His assistant called it exhausting, but only in her journal, never out loud, because Marcus Webb signed her paychecks and she had student loans. The morning it all began, Marcus was running late. Not catastrophically late, 4 minutes, maybe 5, but late enough that the tightness had already started behind his left eye, the one that always betrayed him when his schedule slipped. He had a 9 a.m. pitch meeting with a client who was worth, at minimum, 7 figures to the firm, and he was 4 minutes late because the parking validation machine on the 3rd floor had eaten his ticket, and he'd had to circle back to the lobby to sort it out. The lobby guard was named Daniel Osei. His name was on a small laminated badge clipped to his chest. He'd worked the morning shift at the Ridiculed Capital building for 11 years. He knew the name of every maintenance worker, every mail courier, every regular. He kept a small notebook in his breast pocket, not for work, just personal habit, and in it he wrote down things he wanted to remember. Quotes, observations, the names of his grandchildren's teachers. He was 61 years old, had arthritis in both hands, and still came in 15 minutes early every single shift. None of this was visible to Marcus Webb. What Marcus saw was a heavy-set older man in a blue uniform sitting behind a desk, holding a telephone receiver, speaking in a slow, deliberate voice to whoever was on the other end of the line. And between Marcus and the elevator bank, the elevators that would take him up to his meeting, up to his client, up to the commission he'd been working toward for 6 weeks, was this man. On this phone, moving at the speed of a man who did not understand that Marcus Webb's time was valuable. Excuse me. Marcus's voice came out with a particular edge that meant he was trying to sound polite and failing. I need the guest validation corrected. The machine upstairs took my ticket. Daniel held up one finger, a single, patient gesture, and continued his phone conversation. Marcus checked his watch. He looked at the ceiling. He looked back at Daniel. He shifted his briefcase from his right hand to his left. He exhaled through his nose in a way that was technically not a sigh, but communicated everything a sigh would communicate, and then some. Daniel wrapped up the call, set the receiver down, and looked up. Sorry about that, sir. That was building maintenance. We've had an issue with the 3rd floor validator all morning. You're not the first. I gathered, Marcus said. Can you fix it? I can issue you a manual override slip. Takes about 2 minutes. I don't have 2 minutes. Daniel looked at him, not defensively, not with hurt, just looked the way a man looks when he has seen this exact version of this exact conversation more times than he can count and has long since stopped being surprised by it. I understand you're in a hurry, Daniel said. I'll make it as quick as I can. You know what? Forget it. Marcus pulled out his wallet and slapped a 20 on the desk. I'll just pay the flat rate. Can you process that? We don't accept cash payments at the desk, sir. It has to go through the... Are you serious? It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. Marcus stared at him. And this was the part that the lobby camera would later capture, the part that would matter, the part that people would talk about. Marcus smiled. That smile. The one that wasn't quite a smile. You know, he said, his voice dropping to the register of a man sharing a very patient and reasonable observation. I have a meeting in 4 minutes with a man whose annual tax contribution is probably larger than your entire career earnings. I find it genuinely difficult to believe that a parking slip is the thing standing between me and that elevator. So I'm going to ask you one more time, very clearly, because maybe the issue here is that I'm not being clear enough. He paused. Let it land. Can you Feeks. The parking situation. Or is that above your pay grade? The lobby was not empty. There were two other people at the far end. A courier waiting for a signature. A young woman from the fourth floor getting coffee from the machine near the wall. Both of them heard it. Neither of them said anything. Daniel didn't flinch. He picked up his pen, pulled a slip from the drawer, and began writing. His handwriting was neat, slightly formal. A man who had learned to write before keyboards made neatness irrelevant. Here, he said, sliding the slip across the desk. That'll clear your parking account. No charge. Marcus picked it up without looking at Daniel. Tucked in his coat pocket, turned toward the elevators. Thank you, he said, automatically, reflexively, the way you thank a vending machine, and walked away. Daniel watched him go. Then, he picked up his notebook, opened it to a clean page, and wrote down the date, the time, and the name from the visitor log that Marcus Webb had signed 12 minutes earlier when he'd first come through the lobby. Not for any particular reason, just because Daniel Osei noticed things. The meeting went well. The client was charmed. The commission was likely. Marcus Webb had lunch at a restaurant where the soup cost $18, texted his assistant to reschedule his 3 o'clock, and forgot entirely about the lobby guard by the time his car cleared the parking structure. The next 3 weeks unfolded the way Marcus's weeks usually did, a blur of calls and spreadsheets and client dinners and a Saturday morning golf game he used to like, but now mostly just endure because the right people were there. He was good at his job. Technically excellent, his performance reviews said, year after year. Technically excellent. Strong with numbers. Needs development in interpersonal communication. He'd read that last part and thought, they're wrong about that. He was perfectly effective interpersonally. He just didn't believe in wasting softness on people who couldn't use it. He didn't think about Daniel Osei. Daniel thought about Marcus Webb exactly once, about a week later, when he mentioned the encounter to his daughter on the phone. She asked if he'd been bothered. He thought about it honestly, the way he did most things. No, he said. I've been bothered by rain. That wasn't rain. His daughter laughed. What was it then? He considered. A man showing me who he is, he said. People do that all the time. Most of them don't even know they're doing it. What Daniel didn't tell his daughter, because it wasn't relevant, and because Daniel was not a man who led with credentials, was what was written on the back page of the small notebook in his breast pocket, under the heading Other Work, in the same neat, slightly formal handwriting. His other work. The thing he did on Tuesday and Thursday evenings and all day Sunday and had been doing for going on 6 years now. The thing that 3 weeks from that lobby conversation was going to put Daniel Osei in the same room as Marcus Webb again. Only this time, Marcus Webb would not be the one who walked in first. The invitation came through the firm's senior partner, which was the only reason Marcus agreed to attend. He didn't do charity galas. He found them performative, a room full of wealthy people congratulating themselves for being marginally less wealthy for one evening. But Richard Drayfield himself had asked, which meant attendance was a professional necessity dressed up in cocktail clothes. The event was a fundraiser for a literacy initiative. Inner-city reading programs, after-school tutoring, community libraries. The kind of cause that sounded straightforward until you were at the gala and realized the numbers being thrown around were not small. The keynote speaker was, according to the printed program, an educator, author, and community organizer who had spent the last decade building one of the most successful grassroots literacy networks in the Mid-Atlantic region. Marcus skimmed the program at the bar. He had a glass of something dry and expensive. He made eye contact with Richard across the room and received the nod that meant, "Good. You came. We'll talk later." He was reading the keynote speaker's bio when the room quieted. He looked up. At the podium, adjusting the microphone with hands that moved carefully around arthritic joints, in a dark suit that fit him well, with a small laminated badge still clipped out of pure habit to his breast pocket, was Daniel Osei. Marcus Webb went very still. The room applauded, warmly, with the specific energy of people who were genuinely glad to see this particular person. Not polite gala applause. Real applause. Daniel looked out at the room, unhurried, the same way he had looked at Marcus across a lobby desk, like a man who had seen this exact version of this exact moment before and had never once needed it to be different than it was. "Thank you," he said into the microphone. "I'm going to tell you about a boy who couldn't read his own name when he was 9 years old." The room was silent. "That boy was me," Daniel said. "And I want to tell you what that cost me and what it gave me, because I think it's the only honest way to ask for your help." Marcus Webb stood at the bar with his expensive drink and his printed program and the name on the back of the program that he now recognized, and he listened. He listened for 47 minutes. He did not check his watch once. There are moments in a person's life that function like a cold glass of water thrown directly in the face. Not painful exactly, not violent, just interrupting. The kind of thing that stops whatever was happening before it and forces a man to stand in the sudden wet shock of the present and blink. Marcus Webb was blinking. Daniel Osei had been speaking for 11 minutes, and Marcus had not moved from the spot where he'd been standing when the applause started. His drink was still in his hand. The ice had melted. He hadn't noticed. The story Daniel was telling was not the story Marcus would have written for him. That was the problem. The brain, when it files a person away under not important, builds a small, flat version of them in its filing cabinet. Two-dimensional, easy to ignore, useful for not feeling guilty. Marcus's flat version of Daniel Osei was lobby guard, slow, older, possibly incompetent, not relevant. That version was taking serious structural damage right now, because Daniel Osei was standing at a podium in front of 400 people, and he was not speaking from notes. Not one index card, not a teleprompter, nothing. Just the microphone and the room and 40 years of accumulated experience and a voice that had long ago learned to slow down, not because it was slow, but because it understood that the important things deserved the space to be heard. He talked about growing up in a household where reading was a luxury nobody had time for. His father had worked 2 jobs. His mother had worked 1.5. The concept of sitting down with a book was not poverty. It was something more specific and harder to name, a kind of permanent emergency where every hour was already spoken for before it arrived. By the time Daniel started school, the other kids had 2-3 years of bedtime stories in them. Whole libraries absorbed through their parents' voices. Daniel had none of that. He sat in the back of his first-grade classroom and watched letters arrange themselves on the chalkboard and understood, with the particular clarity that children have before adults teach them to second-guess themselves, that everyone else was reading a map he didn't have. He was not stupid. He was navigating by memory and context and the expressions on other people's faces, and for years he was good enough at it that most teachers didn't notice, or noticed and moved on because there were 34 other children in the room, and the ones who navigated quietly were the ones you left to navigate. He failed 2nd grade. He failed it again. He was put in a special class that was designed, as far as he could tell, to confirm what everyone already suspected, that some children simply weren't the reading kind. He spent 3 years in that class. He memorized the smell of it, pencil shavings and industrial cleaner, and the particular defeat of a room that had been told it was separate for its own good. At 9, a volunteer tutor named Mrs. Patricia Abreu walked into that class on a Tuesday afternoon and sat down next to Daniel and opened a book and said, "You don't need to read it. Just look at the pictures and tell me what you see." He looked at the pictures. He told her what he saw. She listened like what he was saying mattered. He came back the next Tuesday and the one after. By the end of 6 months, Daniel Osei could read. Not fluently, haltingly, slowly, sounding out every syllable, but he could read. And the thing that happened to him in that first year of real reading was not what the inspirational posters in the special class had promised. It was not confidence or joy or a sudden love of school. It was something quieter and more durable than any of that. It was the discovery that the world was larger than he'd been told, that other people in other places in other centuries had felt the exact thing he was feeling and had written it down so that he could find it and not be alone in it. That information, real information, the kind that changed what you knew was possible, was sitting in books, and anyone who could read could reach it. That the gap between him and Every other kid in every other class was not intelligence or ability or worth. It was access. Mrs. Patricia Abreu died in 2003. She was 74. She had been a school volunteer for over 30 years. She tutored somewhere in the range of 200 children. Daniel was at her funeral. He was one of 31 former students who showed up. Marcus set his glass down on a passing tray. He didn't want to hold anything anymore. He needed his hands to be empty. Daniel was talking now about the years between childhood and the security desk. The years Marcus had never once considered might be complicated or full or hard. There had been a welding job that lasted 8 years, then a factory closure that lasted one terrible winter, then a string of smaller jobs held together with the kind of discipline that doesn't come from privilege, but from understanding that the floor is real and you have already seen it and you will not see it again if you have any say in the matter. The security job came at 50, not a fallback, a choice. Daniel had 2 grandchildren by then, both in elementary school, and the morning shift meant he could pick them up on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Tuesday and Thursday evenings after homework and dinner, and the children were back with their mother. He drove to the community center on Alderman Street, and he sat across from a child who could not read, and he opened a book, and he said, "You don't need to read it yet. Just tell me what you see." He'd been doing it for 6 years. He'd trained 14 volunteer tutors. He'd helped found the program that had since expanded to 3 locations, served over 300 children, and had a waiting list. The initiative was called the Tuesday Project, named for the day Mrs. Patricia Abreu had sat down next to a 9-year-old boy who didn't have a map. "The children I work with," Daniel said, his voice settling into the particular weight of a sentence that has been thought about for a long time before being said, "are not problems. They're not deficits. They are not cases. They are people who have not yet been given the right room to be in." He paused. Every one of them already has everything they need. They just don't know yet that the world was built for them too. The room applauded. Not gala applause. The other kind. Marcus did not applaud. His hands were in his pockets. He was looking at the podium and thinking with the slow and unpleasant clarity of a man who cannot stop a thought once it has started about a lobby desk and a parking slip and a smile that wasn't quite a smile and a question delivered in the register of patient contempt. "Can you fix the parking situation?" Or, "Is that above your pay grade?" He had said that. He had said that to this man. The keynote ended. The room stood. Daniel stepped back from a microphone and did something Marcus did not expect. He looked slightly relieved. The way people look after they've said something true that they weren't entirely sure they were brave enough to say. He accepted handshakes, and he smiled, and he was gracious in a way that seemed genuinely effortless, which made it worse somehow in the way that generosity is hardest to witness when you know you have not been generous. Richard Drayfield appeared at Marcus's elbow. "Good, isn't he? We've been supporting the Tuesday Project for 2 years. Remarkable program. Daniel's the real thing. He works in our building," Marcus said. Richard looked at him. "I know. That's actually how we found out about the program. One of the partners recognized him at a city council meeting and made the introduction." He paused. "Why? Do you know him?" Marcus thought about the only honest answer to that question. "No," he said. "Not really." He didn't approach Daniel that night. He told himself it was because the room was crowded and Daniel was busy, which was true. He told himself there was nothing to say, which was not. He drove home. He sat in his car in his building's parking structure. The one in his residential building, not the Drayfield Capital one. The one with a machine that worked perfectly and validated automatically. And he sat there for longer than made sense. He was thinking about the flat, two-dimensional version of Daniel Osei that he had constructed in his filing cabinet. The one that was simple and ignorable and useful for not feeling things. He was thinking about how much effort it actually took to build something like that. The constant, low-level labor of not wondering about people, of not asking, of organizing the world into useful and not useful, relevant and irrelevant, worth talking to and beneath acknowledgement. He had never thought of it as effort before. He had thought of it as efficiency. He was revising that assessment. He pulled out his phone, looked up the Tuesday Project, read through the website for 20 minutes. The mission statement, the founder's bio, the volunteer application page, the photo gallery of children sitting across tables from adults who were leaning in, paying attention, treating the moment like it mattered. He looked at a photo of Daniel sitting across from a boy of about 7. Daniel had a book open between them. The boy was pointing at something on the page. Daniel was looking at where the boy was pointing, and his expression, not the polished keynote face, just the actual face of a man in a Tuesday evening room doing the work, was the expression of someone who has all the time in the world and intends to use it on this specific child. Marcus Webb closed his phone. He went upstairs. He made himself a drink he didn't finish. He stood at his window and looked at the city and tried to remember the last time he had looked at something with that expression, with that quality of attention, that full, unhurried, nothing else matters attention. He couldn't remember. It had been a long time. Maybe never. The thought arrived without drama and sat down and refused to leave the way real thoughts do, the ones that have been waiting in the hallway for years and finally just walk in because the door was left open. He had spent his entire adult life becoming the kind of man who could walk into any room and matter. And he had done it. He walked into rooms and he mattered. The right people knew his name. The numbers were good. The performance reviews said technically excellent, and he read them and thought, I know. But he stood at his window on the 32nd floor, and he thought about a man who drove to a community center on Tuesday and Thursday evenings with arthritis in both hands after a full shift at a security desk and sat across from a child who couldn't read and opened a book and said, tell me what you see. And he thought about what kind of matching that was and whether he had ever once done anything that would cause someone to show up at his funeral. There are two kinds of change: the kind that announces itself, the dramatic pivot, the single life-altering moment you can point to later and say, there, that's where everything turned. And the kind that doesn't announce anything, the kind that just begins quietly, without ceremony, on a random Tuesday morning when a man decides to get to the lobby 8 minutes earlier than he needs to. Marcus Webb was not a man who believed in grand gestures. He worked in finance, which meant he believed in systems, in small, consistent actions compounded over time into significant outcomes. He applied this logic to everything: his savings rate, his exercise routine, his career advancement. He was good at the long game when he understood what game he was playing. The problem was that he had spent 43 years playing a game he'd never really examined. You don't examine the game when you're winning. You only start asking what you're playing for when you stop and look at the scoreboard and realize the number is high, but you don't know what it counts. He got to the lobby at 8:47. Daniel was behind the desk, signing for a delivery package, moving with the careful economy of a man who knows which angles put the least strain on bad joints. He looked up when Marcus came through the revolving door, processed the face, filed it the way he filed all of them, correctly without drama. Morning, Daniel said. Morning, Marcus said. He stopped at the desk. He stood there for a moment in the particular discomfort of a man who has rehearsed what he wants to say and has just realized that every version of it sounds worse out loud than it did in his head. I was at the gala, Marcus said. Thursday night. Daniel waited. Your talk. Marcus cleared his throat. I didn't know who you were. When I came in last month, I didn't know anything about your work or the program or any of it. He paused. That's not an excuse. I'm telling you the context. All right, Daniel said. I was rude to you. The parking situation. I said things that I was condescending and I was rude, and I want to apologize for that. Directly. In person. He said it plainly, not with excessive guilt or performance. Marcus Webb did not do excessive guilt. That too would have been a kind of performance, dressing up the apology in emotion to make himself feel better about delivering it. He just said it, like a man who had weighed the words and decided they were accurate. Daniel looked at him for a moment, not measuring, not deciding whether to accept, just present with it. I appreciate that, Daniel said. I also looked up the Tuesday project. Marcus put his briefcase down on the floor beside him, both hands free now. I read the whole site. I read your founder's statement 3 times. Something shifted, almost imperceptibly, in Daniel's expression. 3 times, he said. The part about access, the way you framed it, not as a charity issue or a poverty issue, but as an infrastructure issue. The idea that literacy is infrastructure the same way roads are infrastructure. That it's not a gift you give poor children, it's a gap you close in a system that was built incompletely. Marcus paused. I've been in finance for 20 years. I understand infrastructure arguments. I understand the difference between presenting something as charity, which makes donors feel good, and then they move on, versus presenting it as investment, which makes the same people feel like partners in an outcome. The way you frame that argument it's the right frame. Daniel said nothing. He was listening the way he listened to a child pointing at a page, with his whole attention on where the other person was pointing. I want to make a contribution, Marcus said. A personal one, not through the firm. I've already looked at your current budget structure and your 3-location expansion costs, and I think you're underpricing your per-student impact in the donor materials. I can actually put you in touch with a data analyst who does pro bono impact measurement for nonprofits. She's helped 3 organizations I know of double their major donor retention by reframing their ROI story. If you want. None of that is conditional on anything. He stopped, looked at his shoes briefly. Then back up. I also want to ask, he said, and here for the first time, something uncertain moved through his voice, not weakness, but the specific texture of a man who is asking something real and knows the answer might be no and has decided to ask anyway. If there's a volunteer orientation coming up for the tutoring program. Daniel considered him. Not the apology, not the donation, not the data analyst contact. Something underneath all of it. What made you want to volunteer? He asked. Not donate, volunteer. Those are different asks. Marcus didn't have the polished answer ready for this one. He'd prepared the apology. He'd prepared the contribution. He hadn't prepared this. I think, he said, slowly, that I've gotten very good at being in rooms where I'm the most important person. And I'm not sure that's what I want to spend my life doing. Silence. The lobby was doing its morning thing around them. Doors revolving, heels on marble, the courier from the 4th floor nodding at Daniel as she passed. The world, indifferent and continuous. There's an orientation, Daniel said, on the 2nd Saturday of next month. 9 a.m. You need to commit to a minimum of 1 session per week for a full school semester. Doesn't matter which day, but it has to be consistent. The kids need consistency more than they need excellence. I understand. You'll work with a child who may or may not make visible progress for the first several weeks. You'll sit across a table and you will not check your phone. You will not look at your watch. You will give that child the most valuable thing you have, which is not your money and not your contacts. It's your full, unhurried attention. For 1 hour. Every week. I can do that. People always say they can do that, Daniel said. Not unkindly. Matter of fact. It's harder than it sounds, for people who aren't used to it. Marcus didn't argue the point. I know. Daniel opened his desk drawer, pulled out a card. Plain white, simple design, the Tuesday project's name, and a phone number and website. He slid across the desk. The same gesture as the parking slip, weeks ago. The same steady hand. Marcus picked it up, looked at it, put it in his coat pocket. Thank you, he said, and this time it was not automatic, not reflexive, not the thing you say to a vending machine. It came from somewhere that the parking slip version of Marcus Webb didn't have access to yet. Some room in him that had always been there, but had been filed under not necessary, not relevant, too slow for the schedule. He showed up to the orientation. This surprised him a little in the days before it. He kept expecting himself to find a reason to back out, a conflict, an emergency, the ordinary friction of a busy schedule asserting its priority. But Saturday morning arrived, and he put on clothes that were not impressive because he had thought about it and decided impressive was the wrong goal for a community center on Alderman Street. And he drove over, and he sat in a plastic chair in a room with 11 other volunteers and listened to a coordinator named Janelle walk them through the program philosophy. Janelle was 29. She had a master's in education. She talked about reading not as a skill, but as a relationship, the relationship between a child, and the idea that the world was meant for them too. She talked about patience as a practice, not a personality trait. She talked about showing up, which she said was 60% of the job, and listening, which was the other 40%. And she said the biggest mistake new volunteers made was wanting to fix things faster than children could be fixed, which was not a criticism of the volunteers, but a reminder that children operated on their own timeline, and the volunteer's job was to be present in that timeline, not to impose a different one. Marcus wrote that down in a notebook, the way Daniel wrote things he wanted to remember. His first student was a boy named Kofi, 8 years old, gap-toothed, suspicious of Marcus in the specific way of a child who has been let down enough times to have developed a policy about new adults. He sat across the table with his arms crossed and looked at Marcus the way Marcus had, for most of his adult life, looked at people he'd already decided weren't worth his time. Marcus recognized the expression. It was instructive. "You don't have to do anything," Marcus said. "I just have to sit here. That's my job." Kofi uncrossed his arms slightly. They sat for a while. Marcus didn't fill the silence. He'd always filled silences before. He was good at controlling a room, at moving conversations where he wanted them to go. He sat on his hands, metaphorically, and let the silence be what it was. After about 3 minutes, Kofi said, "What's that?" He was pointing at the book Marcus had brought. A book about a boy who builds a robot. Does the robot work? You'd have to read it to find out. Kofi looked at the book. He looked at Marcus. The suspicious policy was still in operation, but it had some wiggle room now, the way all good policies do when the new data doesn't fit the old model. "I'm not good at reading," Kofi said. "I know," Marcus said. "That's why we're here." He went back the next week, and the week after. Kofi made slow progress, the kind that isn't visible week to week, but only becomes clear when you compare the beginning to the middle, the way compound interest doesn't look like much until you step back and see the curve. By week 6, Kofi could sound out words he'd never seen before. By week 9, he was asking to take the robot book home. Marcus bought him his own copy. He did not tell anyone at Drayfield Capital about the Tuesday project. He didn't post about it. He didn't mention it at the golf game or at client dinners. This surprised him too. He'd spent his whole career making sure the right people knew what he was doing and why, because visibility was leverage and leverage was power. But this wasn't about leverage. It was about a plastic chair and a gap-toothed 8-year-old and a robot book and 1 hour a week of paying attention so completely that for 60 minutes nothing else in the world needed to be important. He talked to Daniel sometimes. Not long conversations. Daniel was working, Marcus was passing through, but the kind of short exchanges that accumulate into something over time. Daniel asked how Kofi was doing. Marcus told him about the robot book. Daniel nodded in the way of a man who has heard many versions of this story and never gets tired of hearing one more. One morning in March, Marcus was crossing the lobby and Daniel called after him. "I want to show you something." He reached into the drawer where the parking slips lived and pulled out a small notebook. He opened it to a page from 4 months ago. October, a date Marcus recognized. Next to the date, in neat and slightly formal handwriting, was a name. Marcus Webb. Underneath it, 3rd floor validator issue. Rude. Specific kind of rude doesn't see. "No, watch." Marcus looked at it. "You wrote me down," he said. "I write down things I want to remember," Daniel said. "Sometimes I write them because they're worth keeping. Sometimes because I want to see if they change." He flipped to a different page. March. A new entry, same name. Marcus Webb. Saturday mornings. Alderman Street. Kofi, robot book. Nothing else. Marcus looked at it for a moment. Both entries. The arc from one to the other, written in the same handwriting, in the same notebook by the same man who had never once needed Marcus Webb to see him in order to know exactly who he was. "You knew," Marcus said. "That night at the gala. You recognized me." "Yes." "And you didn't say anything." "No." "Why not?" Daniel closed the notebook, put it back in his breast pocket, the same place it had always been, where it had always been visible if you were the kind of person who looked. "Because," he said, "what would I have said? Some people show you who they are, and then they stay that way. Some people show you who they are, and then they change. You can't tell which is which by pointing it out. You can only tell by waiting. He picked up the phone receiver that had started ringing. "Have a good day, Mr. Webb." Marcus walked to the elevator. He pressed a button. He waited. He thought about all the lobbies he had walked through in his life. All the desks. All the faces behind them that he had filed away under not important, not relevant, beneath acknowledgement. All the people he had smiled at with the smile that wasn't quite a smile. All the notebooks he hadn't noticed. He thought about Mrs. Patricia Abreu, who had sat down next to a 9-year-old boy in a classroom that had already given up on him and said, "You don't have to read it. Just tell me what you see." He thought about 31 people at a funeral. The elevator opened. He stepped in. He thought, "I want to be a person that someone writes down in a notebook. Not because I was rude. Not because I was impressive. Because I was there. Because I showed up. Because I paid attention." The doors closed. He had a 9 o'clock meeting. After that, his calendar was open until noon. He pulled out his phone and sent Janelle at the Tuesday Project a message asking if they needed any help on weekday mornings. The reply came back in 4 minutes. "Yes, always."